All right, so we're going to go through the answers to the practice problems from the note sheet. You should have tried these problems before watching this video so that you can sort of see if you're on the right track. But with that said, there are often multiple approaches to these problems. So if you don't do exactly what I do on the video here and you think you're on the right track, just check with your teacher and see if you came up with an alternate way. So for number one, we're trying to verify that cosine of x times cotangent of x plus sine of x equals cosecant of x. And so we'll start on the more complicated side, try the left side, and a good strategy to work with is to replace that cotangent with cosine over sine, that fundamental identity. And then we can sort of squish this into one fraction. So that's going to be cosine squared of x over sine of x. And then this is another fraction, but if I want to think of it that way, with a 1 in the denominator. And so now I'm going to try and get a common denominator. This one has sine, this one has 1. And so if I can just get this one to have sine, should be good to go. They both have denominator of sine right now. So I can combine them into one big fraction. And what am I going to have on the top? We'll have cosine squared of x plus sine squared of x. And that should definitely look very familiar. That's our main Pythagorean identity. So that numerator is equal to 1. And of course, 1 over sine of x is our old friend cosecant of x. And that's just what I want it to be. And so I'm done. Right? So first one is verified. Problem number 2 is this big messy fraction. So sine of x over 1 plus cosine of x. And then we're adding to it 1 plus cosine of x over sine of x. So adding a fraction to its reciprocal, and supposedly this is all going to clean up and just be equal to 2 cosine of x. So I'm going to try working on the left-hand side again. I've got these big fractions. Over here I just have one term, so I'm going to try and get a common denominator. This one I'm just going to multiply by the other denominator, so sine of x over sine of x. And this one, I'm sort of sneak it in here, I'm going to multiply by 1 plus cosine of x over 1 plus cosine of x, right? So I'm basically just multiplying by the denominator from the other fraction. And so my new fraction is going to have this product of the denominators. So sine of x times 1 plus cosine of x. And so now what do I have in the numerator? Well, here I have sine of x times sine of x. So that's sine squared of x. And then the other piece is going to be 1 plus cosine of x times 1 plus cosine of x. Okay, so I end up with that. This is still fairly messy. This product I can do FOIL on and see where that goes. So when I FOIL, I get 1, and then in the middle I get a cosine of x, and I also get a cosine of x in the outer. So I get 2 cosine of x. And then at the end I get what? Cosine squared of x. It's sort of a big mess up on the top. The bottom, there's not really anything I can do with. I do sort of notice when I'm looking at the bottom that I've got a sine x on the bottom. That's promising because I'm looking to end up with a cosecant of x, but I've got a lot of other junk going on here. But thankfully I notice on the top I've got sine squared of x, cosine squared of x, and so those two things together equal 1. So I've got that new 1 there. And then I've got my other 1 and my 2 cosine of x. Down here I've got my sine of x and my 1 plus cosine of x. Right? And so now I combine on the top and I've got 2 plus 2 cosine of x. And on the bottom I still haven't done anything with that. it's definitely cleaning up, but I still have a ways to go. I notice both of these have 2, and so there's my strategy from the last video. Pull out that common factor, and after I do that, I see that I am actually home free now, because now I have a 1 plus cosine of x on the top. I have that exact same thing on the bottom, so I'm able to cross those out. That leaves me with 2 over sine of x, which is the same thing as 2 cosecant of x. Get that on the screen there. That is exactly what I was aiming for. So I am done. So that one's definitely a challenging one. Lots of steps to it, lots of algebra, but hopefully all those steps do make sense. All right, moving right along to number 3. Number 3 says we want to verify cosecant squared of x minus 1 over cosecant squared of x is supposedly equal to cosine squared of x. This is one where, oh, here comes an announcement.
It is now 2:55. If you are not involved in a supervised after-school activity, please exit the building. If you are waiting to be picked up, please wait by door number 1 entrance.
So this is one where there are probably a few different ways you could approach it. When I see that cosecant squared of x minus 1, it makes me think of one of my Pythagorean identities, and if I subtract 1 from both sides here, I see that cosecant squared minus 1 is equal to cotangent squared. So I think that's probably the way I would start, just to get that top a little bit simpler, is going to be equal to cotangent squared of x. And then that's over cosecant squared of x. I notice on the right I'm back to my normal cosine, and so I think I'll probably just switch all these to sines and cosines. So cotangent is cosine over sine. So cotangent squared is cosine squared over sine squared. Cosecant squared will be 1 over sine squared. And now when I have fractions within fractions, I take the bottom fraction, invert it, and multiply, and boom, the sine squareds cancel. I get cosine squared of x. Just like that, I'm done. So a lot quicker than the last one. And that leaves us with number 4. And number 4, again, I'm sure there are multiple ways you could approach this one. Probably fastest if you notice that this is one of our identities from that sheet again. So tangent squared plus 1, or 1 plus tangent squared, is secant squared. And so if I notice that, I'm pretty much done right away, because secant squared is 1 over cosine squared. Cosine squareds cancel, and sure enough, that thing that looks pretty messy is actually just equal to 1. So hopefully those went well. We're going to practice these for a few days, so it definitely takes some getting used to and doing some practice. And yeah, hopefully you had some success.